She should have walked away. The enormous black hound lying beneath the rain wasn't just injured. It was the Alpha King's legendary guardian, a beast so feared that even seasoned warriors refused to stand within reach of it. Yet a young healer did something no one expected. She knelt beside the dying creature, tore a strip from her own cloak, and began stitching its wound with her bare hands. Everyone around her called her foolish. Some warned the hound would wake and destroy her. Others begged her to save herself instead. But the beast never moved. It simply looked into her eyes and trusted the hands that refused to abandon it. Miles away, inside a fortress built for kings, the Alpha King suddenly staggered as a sharp pain rushed through a bond only he could feel. His guardian was still alive. Someone had touched the impossible. Someone the beast had willingly accepted. Who was this unknown woman? Why had the kingdom's most feared guardian placed its life in the hands of a complete stranger? And why did the ancient bond connecting the Alpha King to his loyal companion suddenly carry something it had never carried before? Oh, neither of them knew that before the sun set, a single act of compassion would awaken secrets hidden for generations, challenge the oldest laws of the kingdom, and quietly begin a love story that fate itself had been waiting to reveal. The rain had been falling since before dawn. A silver mist drifted between the towering pine trees, softening the edges of the forgotten border road. Every leaf shimmered beneath tiny drops of water, and the forest seemed to breathe with a quiet sadness that only lonely places carried. Along the muddy trail, a single wooden cart moved at an unhurried pace. Its horse was old but gentle, pulling supplies wrapped carefully beneath waterproof cloth. Dried herbs hung from the sides, filling the cool air with the scent of lavender and pine. Holding the reins was a young healer named Elara. She had spent years traveling from village to village, offering help wherever she found people in need. She never asked which pack they belonged to or whether they could repay her. Kindness, she believed, was never something that should be measured. As the morning grew quieter, her horse suddenly slowed. Its ears lifted. Then it stopped completely. Elara frowned. The old horse had never been afraid without reason. She climbed down from the cart and gently stroked its neck. "It's all right," she whispered. Only then did she notice the faint smell of smoke drifting through the rain. Not a campfire. Something else. She followed the scent until broken wagons slowly appeared through the mist. Wood lay scattered across the road. Barrels had rolled into the grass. Blankets fluttered in the cold wind. Whatever had happened here, it had ended only a short while ago. Elara moved carefully, listening. No shouting, no footsteps, only the quiet rhythm of falling rain. Near one overturned wagon she noticed several empty iron cages. Their doors hung open. Heavy chains rested silently in the mud. Her heart tightened. She had seen enough of the world to understand what kind of caravan this had been. People had been transported here against their will. She lowered her eyes for a moment. "No one should ever live in chains," she murmured. As then, a faint sound reached her ears. Not from the forest. From beneath one of the broken wagons. She quickly knelt. "It's all right," she said softly. "You can come out." For several seconds nothing happened. Then a tiny hand appeared. Slowly, a little girl crawled into the open. She couldn't have been older than 7. Rain had soaked her tangled brown hair, and she clutched a small wooden carving tightly against her chest. She looked exhausted. More than anything, she looked afraid. Elara removed her own cloak and gently wrapped it around the child's shoulders. "You don't have to be frightened anymore." The little girl nodded without speaking. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she looked toward the trees behind them. "Please," she whispered. "Don't leave him." Elara followed her gaze. First she saw nothing. Then, beneath the shelter of an enormous oak tree, a dark shape rested against the roots. She walked closer. It wasn't a wolf. It was much larger. A magnificent black hound with thick midnight-colored fur lay perfectly still beneath the rain. Its breathing was slow and uneven, and signs of a recent struggle surrounded the clearing. Broken branches, deep paw prints, discarded arrows resting harmlessly in the wet grass. The animal had clearly protected someone. Even now, despite its exhaustion, it remained between the child and the open road. Elara slowly knelt nearby. The hound opened its golden eyes. They were watchful, tired, but not angry. For a long moment neither moved. The little girl quietly stepped beside Elara. "He stayed with me." Her tiny voice almost disappeared beneath the rain. "He wouldn't leave." Before Elara could answer, rough voices echoed from farther down the road. "There they are." Several men hurried toward the clearing. Their clothes were dusty from travel, and their expressions carried little concern for anything except recovering what they believed belonged to them. One of them pointed toward the child. "There she is." Another noticed the hound. "Forget the beast. It won't last long. Leave it." Elara slowly stood. The little girl instinctively moved behind her. One of the men spoke again. "Step aside. We're taking the child." Elara's voice remained calm. "No." The man frowned. "She's our responsibility." Elara met his eyes without fear. "No child is someone's property." Silence settled over the clearing. The rain continued falling between them. One trader shook his head impatiently. "You're making this difficult." Elara didn't answer. Instead, she turned back toward the great hound. She opened her medical satchel and removed clean cloth, fresh herbs, and a small sewing needle used for emergency treatment. One of the men laughed. "You're wasting your time. It can't be saved." But Elara had already made her choice. She gently cleaned the injured animal as carefully as she could. The hound never growled, never snapped. It simply watched her with quiet eyes, almost as though it understood she was trying to help. The little girl held a bowl of clean rainwater with both hands. Together they worked in complete silence. The forest itself seemed to grow still. Even the traders stopped talking. Minute by minute, the healer carefully finished treating the great hound. Finally, she tied the last knot in the bandage and softly rested her hand against its neck. "There. You can rest now." The hound slowly lowered its head onto the ground. Its breathing became calmer. For the first time since she had found it, it looked peaceful. The little girl smiled through her tears. Then she opened her small hand. Inside rested a beautifully carved wooden wolf. She carefully placed it into Elara's palm. In the quietest voice imaginable, she whispered, "He belongs to the Alpha King." Elara looked from the carving to the sleeping hound. Questions filled her mind. But before she could ask a single one, far beyond the border forest, inside a fortress built of black stone, powerful Alpha King suddenly stopped walking. His hand pressed firmly against his chest. A strange feeling passed through the invisible bond he shared with his missing companion. For months he had felt only distance, only silence. No, for the first time, he felt warmth. Someone had found the hound. Somehow, that simple act of kindness reached all the way to his heart. Morning arrived slowly over Blackstone Fortress. Golden light touched the highest towers first, but warmth never seemed to reach the heart of the castle. Massive stone walls surrounded the royal grounds, and banners carrying the silver wolf crest moved gently in the cold mountain wind. Inside those walls, everything appeared orderly. The guards stood perfectly still. Servants hurried quietly through the halls. Council members prepared for another day of difficult decisions. Yet something felt different. The fortress itself seemed unusually quiet, as though it too were waiting for something. High above the courtyard, the Alpha King stood alone on a stone balcony overlooking his kingdom. King Kaelen had ruled for many years, and few questioned his strength. His presence alone commanded respect. He spoke little, but when he did, even the loudest voices became silent. People feared his authority. His soldiers trusted his judgment. But no one truly knew the loneliness he carried. His eyes wandered toward the distant forests beyond the borders. the same direction they had turned every morning for months. Commander Aldrich approached carefully. "My king." Kaelen didn't turn. "Any news?" The commander lowered his head. "We searched the northern valleys again." Quiet pause followed. "Nothing." Kaelen closed his eyes for only a moment. Months had passed since his loyal hound disappeared while investigating strange reports along the border. Many believed the animal had simply been lost. Others believed it would never return. But Kaelen had never accepted either answer. The bond between them still remained. Faint, distant, yet alive. Some nights he sensed exhaustion. Other nights, only silence. The commander spoke carefully. "The council has gathered. They're waiting." Kaelen nodded once before following him inside. The royal council chamber was filled with long wooden tables, ancient maps, and flickering lanterns. Representatives from several territories had already arrived. The moment the king entered, every conversation stopped. An elderly council member stood first. "My king, the eastern border grows restless." Another unfolded a map. "There are reports of merchants refusing to travel through the forest roads." A third spoke immediately afterward. "The neighboring packs believe we're weakening our patrols." Everyone waited for Kaelen's response. "Does it?" He quietly stared at the large map covering the table. His attention drifted toward the same forest where his companion had vanished. One counselor noticed. "My king, we cannot continue spending valuable resources searching for one animal." The room fell silent. Another advisor added gently, "The kingdom needs your attention elsewhere." No one intended disrespect. They simply believed duty came before personal loss. Commander Aldrich finally spoke. "That wasn't just any animal. He protected this kingdom countless times. He deserves to be found." Several council members exchanged uncertain glances. One sighed. "We respect the bond. But hope cannot guide royal decisions forever." Kaelen remained silent. His expression revealed nothing. Only those who knew him well recognized the sadness hidden behind his calm eyes. Before another discussion could begin, everything changed. A sudden feeling passed through him. Not pain, not fear. Something softer. Something unfamiliar. His hand instinctively rested against his chest. The room blurred for just a second. A quiet warmth spread through the invisible bond connecting him to his missing companion. His breathing slowed. The feeling wasn't coming from himself. It was coming through the bond. Someone was beside the hound. Not hunting it. Not fearing it. Helping it. Kaelen looked toward the nearest window. Rain clouds still covered the mountains beyond the kingdom. Somewhere beneath those clouds, someone had chosen kindness. Commander Aldrich stepped closer. "My king." Kaelen slowly looked at him. The bond changed. The commander frowned. "What do you mean?" "For months, there was only distance." Kaelen's voice remained calm. "Now I can feel peace." No one in the council understood. One elderly scholar carefully asked, "Is such a thing possible?" Kaelen answered quietly, "I don't know. But someone found him." Silence filled the chamber once more. Several council members exchanged doubtful looks. One finally spoke. "Even if that's true, we still don't know where." Kaelen nodded. "Not yet." The meeting continued, but the king heard very little. Discussions about borders, trade routes, harvest supplies, political alliances. The words drifted through the room like distant echoes. His thoughts remained elsewhere. For the first time in many months, his companion no longer felt completely alone. That single realization refused to leave him. Later that afternoon, Kaelen walked through the royal library. It had always been the quietest place inside the fortress. Towering shelves reached toward the ceiling. Old books carried stories from generations long forgotten. He stopped before a faded journal describing the ancient bond between Alpha rulers and their chosen guardians. Many believed the bond allowed them to share strength during battle. Few understood how deeply emotions could travel across it. Kaelen gently closed the book. "If you're alive," he whispered quietly, "hold on a little longer." Outside, snow-white clouds slowly parted, allowing a narrow beam of sunlight to reach the distant forests. Far beyond the fortress, the great black hound rested peacefully for the first time in many months. And although neither of them understood why, both the Alpha King and the unknown healer had unknowingly begun changing each other's lives. The journey connecting them had only just begun. The rain finally ended 2 days later. Morning sunlight filtered gently through the tall pine trees, turning every drop of water into tiny pieces of gold. Birds cautiously returned to the forest, their songs replacing the silence that had lingered after the storm. Deep within the woods stood an old stone chapel that time had almost forgotten. Its roof had been repaired with wooden beams gathered from the forest. Wildflowers surrounded the worn steps, and herbs hung drying beneath the windows. It wasn't a grand place, but to those with nowhere else to go, felt like home. This was where Elara brought the injured, not because she owned the chapel, but because no one else wanted it. She believed forgotten places often became the safest shelters. Inside, warm sunlight stretched across the wooden floor while a small fire crackled peacefully in the fireplace. The little girl sat quietly at a table, carefully peeling roots for medicine. Although she still spoke very little, the fear that had once filled her eyes was slowly beginning to fade. Every few moments she looked toward the corner of the room. The great black hound rested there on a thick blanket beside the fire. Its breathing was much steadier now. The bandages around its body remained clean, and the silver thread Elara had used to stitch the wound held everything securely in place. She knelt beside the animal and smiled softly. "You've surprised me." The hound opened one golden eye. "You heal faster than anyone I've ever met." It gave the smallest movement of its tail before closing its eyes again. The little girl giggled. "I think he likes you." Elara laughed quietly. "I think he's simply tired." The child shook her head. "No. He watches you." Elara glanced toward the hound. Sure enough, the enormous creature had opened its eyes again. Not because it felt threatened, simply because she had walked away. It watched every movement she made around the room. When she gathered herbs, its eyes followed. When she checked another patient's bandages, it quietly lifted its head. Only after she returned did it relax once more. The healer smiled to herself. "I've never had such a careful patient." That afternoon, more travelers arrived seeking help. An elderly man with aching joints. A young mother carrying her sleepy son. A farmer who had injured his shoulder repairing a fence. Each was welcomed the same way. No questions. No payment expected. Only kindness. While Elara worked, several visitors noticed the giant hound sleeping nearby. One man immediately stepped backward. "Should we be worried?" Elara calmly continued grinding herbs. "Only if you choose to frighten him." The visitors exchanged uncertain looks. The little girl spoke before anyone else could. "He protects good people." Her voice carried such certainty that no one argued. One by one, the visitors relaxed. Before sunset, something unexpected happened. The elderly man finished his treatment and quietly placed a loaf of fresh bread on the table. "I don't have much," he said. "But kindness should never leave empty-handed." Soon another family left fresh vegetables. Another brought warm blankets. Someone else returned carrying honey collected that morning. None of them had been asked. They simply wanted to give something back. The old chapel slowly filled with simple gifts. The little girl looked around with wide eyes. So many people. Elara smiled. Kindness grows. Sometimes it just needs someone to plant the first seed. The child thought carefully before asking, "Is that why you help everyone?" Elara paused while placing herbs into small cloth bags. "When I was little, there were strangers who helped me. They expected nothing in return. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I would do the same. The little girl quietly nodded. For the first time in many days, she smiled without fear. As evening settled over the forest, orange firelight danced across the chapel walls. The visitors had all returned home. Only 3 remained: the healer, child, and the great black hound. The little girl had already fallen asleep beneath a warm blanket. Elara sat beside the fireplace reading from an old medical journal whose pages had turned yellow with age. The room was peaceful. Only the gentle crackling of burning wood broke the silence. Without realizing it, she began speaking aloud. I couldn't save everyone. Her voice remained soft. There were times I arrived too late. She slowly turned another page. I still remember every face. The hound quietly lifted its head. Its golden eyes rested on her. She smiled sadly. You probably don't understand any of this. But sometimes talking makes the silence lighter. The great beast slowly stood. Its movements were careful but much stronger than before. It crossed the room one slow step at a time. Elara lowered the book. What is it? Without making a sound, the hound gently rested its massive head against her shoulder. She froze, then smiled. I'll take that as encouragement. After a few quiet moments, the animal carefully placed one large paw over her hand. Not to hold her, not to trap her, simply to stay close. Elara gently rested her free hand on the thick black fur. Neither of them moved for a long while. Outside, the moon slowly rose above the forest. Miles away, inside Blackstone Fortress, King Kaelen suddenly woke from sleep. His breathing was calm. For the first time in many months, he had dreamed, not of battles, not of loss, but of warm firelight, the scent of fresh herbs, and the faint sound of a woman quietly reading beside someone she believed was listening. When he opened his eyes, the strange feeling remained. Commander Aldrich, standing watch outside the chamber, noticed the king smiling ever so slightly. It was an expression the old commander had not seen in a very long time. Kaelen looked toward the moonlit forest beyond the castle walls. I don't know who you are, he whispered into the quiet night. But thank you. Far away, the hound slept peacefully beside Elara's chair. Neither of them knew that an invisible bond had already begun weaving their destinies together. And somewhere deep within the ancient forests, fate had quietly begun to move. 3 more peaceful days passed. The old chapel hidden deep within the forest slowly became a place where frightened travelers found comfort instead of fear. Morning sunlight poured through the cracked stained glass windows, painting soft colors across the worn wooden floor. Outside, the forest was alive again. Birds sang from the tallest branches. A nearby stream flowed gently over smooth stones. The air carried the scent of pine, fresh herbs, and damp earth after the recent rain. Elara stepped outside carrying a basket of freshly washed bandages. She smiled as she stretched beneath the warm sunlight. For the first time in many weeks, everything felt quiet. Behind her, the great black hound followed at a slow pace. Its strength had returned little by little. The wound no longer troubled it as much, although Elara still insisted it rest more than it wanted to. She turned toward the enormous animal and folded her arms. I know exactly what you're thinking. The hound tilted its head. No, you are not going hunting today. One of its ears twitched. You still need another day of rest. The little girl burst into laughter from the chapel doorway. I think he disagrees. Elara laughed too. I noticed. The hound quietly sat beside them, almost as if accepting defeat. It was such an ordinary moment. Yet none of them realized someone was already watching from the edge of the forest. Hidden among the trees stood a lone traveler wearing a dark cloak. His face remained partially hidden beneath the hood. Dust covered his boots after several days of riding. He carried no royal banners, no golden armor. Nothing about him suggested he ruled an entire kingdom. Yet his sharp silver eyes never missed a single detail. This was King Kaelen, He had ignored every warning from his council. Ignoring royal protocol, he had left the fortress alone, following the faint emotional pull that had guided him through forests and valleys for days. He expected to find a wounded companion, perhaps even a battlefield. He found peace. His bonded hound rested calmly beside a woman gathering herbs beneath the morning sun. Kaelen remained perfectly still. The sight before him felt impossible. His companion had trusted no stranger since it was a young wolf. Even experienced soldiers kept a respectful distance. No. The great beast calmly followed the healer wherever she walked. There was no fear, no caution, only quiet trust. Kaelen whispered to himself, "What happened to you?" As if hearing his voice carried by the wind, the hound slowly lifted its head. Its ears stood upright. For one long moment, Animal and Alpha simply looked at one another across the clearing. The bond between them stirred gently, not with pain, with recognition. The hound stood. Kaelen expected it to run toward him immediately. It glanced back at Elara. Only after making sure she was safe did it take a few slow steps toward the forest. Kaelen's heart tightened. His oldest companion had changed, not because it loved him less, but because someone else had earned its trust. The realization surprised him far more than he expected. Elara noticed movement between the trees. Someone's there. Kaelen stepped into the sunlight with both hands clearly visible. "I apologize. I didn't mean to frighten anyone." Elara studied him carefully. His clothing was simple. His posture, however, spoke of discipline. She guessed he had once served as a soldier. "You've been traveling?" Kaelen nodded. "For several days. I heard there was a healer living in these woods." The little girl smiled brightly. "That's Elara." Kaelen looked at her for the first time. "And who are you?" The child hesitated. She still wasn't ready to speak about her past. Elara gently answered for her. "She's staying here until she finds a place where she feels safe." Kaelen respected the quiet answer and didn't ask another question. His attention slowly returned to the hound. "May I?" Elara smiled. "Of course." The great hound walked toward Kaelen and stopped only a few steps away. Neither moved. Then the animal gently lowered its head. Kaelen rested one hand against its thick black fur. His eyes quietly closed. For the first time in months, the bond between them felt complete again. He smiled. "So, you ignored every command I ever gave you." The hound gave a soft huff that almost sounded amused. The little girl laughed. "I think he missed you." Kaelen looked down at the animal. "I missed him too." Elara watched the moment with quiet curiosity. "You've known each other for a long time." Kaelen opened his eyes. "A very long time. He once helped me find my way home." It wasn't a lie. It simply wasn't the whole truth. Elara nodded thoughtfully. "He must trust you." Kaelen smiled faintly. "I could say the same about you." For a brief moment, their eyes met. Neither looked away immediately. There was no sudden spark, no dramatic realization, only quiet curiosity, as though two lonely people had unexpectedly met someone who understood silence. The little girl interrupted the moment. "You should stay for supper." Elara looked toward Kaelen. "If you're not in a hurry." He hadn't shared a peaceful meal with strangers in years. "I'd like that." As evening settled over the chapel, a simple meal was placed on the old wooden table. Fresh bread, vegetable soup, wild berries gathered that morning. Nothing luxurious, everything made with care. The little girl happily spoke about the birds she had seen that afternoon. Elara laughed at her stories. Even Kaelen found himself smiling more than once. The conversation remained gentle. No one spoke about kingdoms. No one mentioned politics. For one quiet evening, the weight of responsibility disappeared. After supper, Elara began washing the bowls. Kaelen silently helped without being asked. "You don't have to," she said. "I know." He smiled. But I'd like to. She looked at him with mild surprise. Most travelers usually offer stories. You offered to wash dishes. Kaelen chuckled softly. I've been told I should practice being useful. The little girl laughed. I like him. The hound, lying near the fireplace, opened one eye before settling comfortably again. Later, as stars filled the sky, Kaelen prepared to leave. I've already taken enough of your kindness. Elara handed him a small pouch. Medicine. For the road. I don't know if you'll need it. But I'd rather you have it. Kaelen accepted it carefully. Thank you. As he walked toward the forest, the great hound quietly stood and followed him several steps. Kaelen's heart lifted. The animal stopped. It looked back toward the warmly lit chapel, toward Elara. After one quiet moment, it turned around and walked back to her side. Kaelen stood silently beneath the trees. He wasn't jealous. He wasn't angry, only deeply puzzled. His oldest companion had made a choice he could not explain. Watching the hound lie peacefully beside the healer once more, Kaelen whispered into the night, "What is it about you?" He disappeared into the darkness, carrying more questions than answers. Inside the chapel, Elara watched the traveler vanish beyond the trees. Something about him felt strangely familiar. She couldn't explain why, but she had a feeling. Their paths had not crossed for the last time. The next morning arrived wrapped in golden sunlight. For the first time in many days, laughter echoed around the old chapel. The little girl chased colorful butterflies through the wildflowers while Elara carefully watered the small garden she had planted beside the stone walls. Nearby, the great black hound rested beneath a large oak tree. Its eyes were closed, but every now and then one ear twitched, quietly listening to everything around it. Peace had finally found the forgotten place. Or so it seemed. A flock of birds suddenly burst into the sky. The hound's eyes opened instantly. Its head lifted. Its body became perfectly still. Elara noticed the change immediately. What is it? The hound stood. Not frightened. Alert. Its golden eyes focused toward the narrow forest road. A moment later, the distant sound of horses drifted through the trees. The little girl's smile disappeared. She slowly stepped closer to Elara. I know that sound. Her tiny voice trembled. Elara gently placed a reassuring hand on the child's shoulder. It's all right. I'm here. Within moments, several riders appeared between the trees. They wore expensive traveling clothes and carried the same markings Elara had seen on the abandoned caravan days earlier. The leader guided his horse to a stop. His eyes quickly searched the clearing. Then they settled on the little girl. There she is. He smiled with quiet satisfaction. We've been looking everywhere. The child instinctively hid behind Elara. The great hound calmly walked forward, placing itself several steps ahead of them. It didn't growl. Simply stood there, steady, watchful. The leader looked at the enormous animal before shaking his head. So that's where our missing guard ended up. One of the riders laughed. It seems someone has made new friends. Elara stepped forward. What do you want? The man answered politely, though his smile never reached his eyes. We're simply collecting people from our caravan. They belong with us. Elara met his gaze. No one belongs to another person. The man's smile slowly faded. I believe you're mistaken. We're responsible for transporting them. The healer remained calm. The frightened child standing behind me doesn't see it that way. Silence settled across the clearing. Wind gently moved through the tall grass. The leader sighed. I don't wish to argue. Hand the girl over. We'll leave peacefully. The little girl quietly reached for Elara's hand. Her fingers shook. Elara gently squeezed them. Then she answered with one simple word. No. The riders exchanged glances. One stepped down from his horse. You don't understand the trouble you're inviting. Before Elara could reply, a familiar voice spoke from behind them. I believe she understands perfectly. Everyone turned. The quiet traveler from the previous evening stepped out from the trees. Kaelen still wore ordinary travel clothes. No crown. No royal cloak. Only calm confidence. Elara looked surprised. "I thought you'd already left." "I almost did." Kaelen smiled gently. "Then I remembered I never returned your medicine pouch." He held it up with a faint smile. The moment felt strangely ordinary. Yet something about his presence immediately changed the atmosphere. The riders studied him carefully. "And who are you?" Kaelen answered simply. "A traveler." One rider laughed. "Then keep traveling. This doesn't concern you." Kaelen looked toward the frightened child. Then toward Elara. Finally, toward the great black hound standing quietly between everyone. "It concerns me now." The leader stepped closer. "We don't want unnecessary problems." "Neither do I," Kaelen replied calmly. "So perhaps today everyone can choose the peaceful road." The leader folded his arms. "And if we don't?" Kaelen remained perfectly still. His voice never became louder. "Then you'll still leave." The confidence in his answer made several riders hesitate. The little girl looked up at Elara. "He's not scared." Elara quietly smiled. "No, I don't think he is." For several long seconds, no one moved. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Finally, the leader glanced around the clearing. The hound remained motionless. Kaelen never reached for a weapon. Elara refused to step aside. The little girl stood safely behind them. Something about the situation no longer felt worth forcing. The leader gave a slow nod. "Very well. We'll leave. But remember, the border remembers everything." Without another word, he signaled his companions. The horses turned. Within moments, they disappeared back into the forest. Only the sound of fading hoofbeats remained. The little girl released a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "They're gone." Elara smiled. "Yes, they're gone." The child threw her arms around Elara without saying another word. Nearby, the great hound relaxed and quietly returned beneath the oak tree. Kaelen watched the child carefully. No child should have to carry that much fear. Elara nodded. That's why she won't face it alone anymore. Later that afternoon, Elara and Kaelen searched the abandoned riders' campsite to ensure nothing dangerous had been left behind. Instead of weapons, they found several heavy wagons filled with unused chains, locks, and empty travel cages. The little girl stared silently at them. Her expression grew distant. Elara understood immediately. These weren't just pieces of metal. They were painful memories. She looked toward Kaelen. "What should we do with them?" Kaelen answered without hesitation. "They've served their last purpose." Together they carried the chains into an open clearing. Elara gathered dry branches. The little girl carefully placed wildflowers nearby. Kaelen struck flint against stone until a small flame appeared. Slowly, the fire grew. One by one, the old chains disappeared into the warmth of the flames. No celebration. No cheering. Only quiet silence. The little girl watched until the last heavy lock disappeared beneath glowing embers. Then she smiled. A real smile. Perhaps the first completely fearless smile since Elara had met her. Kaelen stood beside the healer, watching the firelight reflect in her eyes. "You could have walked away that day." Elara looked toward the flames. "I know. But if kindness waits for someone else, it often never arrives." Kaelen lowered his eyes. He had spent years protecting kingdoms. She had spent years protecting people. Wow. Her quiet courage felt every bit as powerful as his strength. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains, warm orange light filled the clearing. The great hound lay peacefully nearby. The little girl laughed while chasing glowing fireflies through the evening grass. Kaelen watched Elara without saying a word. Something inside him had begun to change. Not because fate demanded it. Not because of an ancient bond. But because every day she quietly chose compassion, even when no one was watching. and for reasons he still couldn't explain, leaving the chapel no longer felt easy. For the first time in many years, the Alpha King found himself wondering what it might feel like. The following morning arrived with an unusual stillness. The forest, usually alive with birdsong, seemed quieter than before. Even the wind moved gently through the pine trees, as if carrying a warning no one could yet understand. Elara stepped outside the chapel with a basket of freshly picked herbs. The little girl was feeding small birds near the garden, smiling each time one landed close enough to eat from her hand. The great black hound rested nearby, watching peacefully. For a brief moment, life felt wonderfully ordinary. Then the sound of horses echoed through the valley once again. This time, however, the riders wore polished silver armor marked with the royal crest of the Blackstone Kingdom. Their horses slowed as they reached the chapel. Leading them was Commander Aldrich. His calm eyes immediately found Kaelen, who had just stepped outside carrying a bucket of fresh water. Without hesitation, every royal guard dismounted. They lowered one knee. "My king!" The words seemed to freeze the entire clearing. The little girl looked from the soldiers to Kaelen in complete surprise. Elara remained silent. Her eyes slowly widened. For several long moments, no one spoke. Kaelen let out a quiet breath. He had hoped for a little more time before the truth reached the chapel. Commander Aldrich stood. "The council has searched everywhere. The kingdom needs your return." Kaelen nodded slightly. "I know." Only then did he turn toward Elara. "I owe you an explanation." Elara smiled politely, though surprise still filled her eyes. "So, you weren't simply a traveler." Kaelen gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "No, I wasn't." The little girl blinked several times before whispering, "You're the Alpha King." Kaelen knelt so his eyes met hers. "I am." The child hesitated, then smiled. "You still washed the dishes." Kaelen couldn't help laughing. "I did." The simple answer made even Commander Aldrich smile. For a brief moment the atmosphere became lighter. Unfortunately, it didn't last. Several richly dressed council members rode into the clearing behind the soldiers. Unlike the guards, their expressions carried neither warmth nor gratitude. One elderly counselor looked directly at the great black hound. The animal remained peacefully beside Elara. Its calm behavior immediately caught his attention. His expression darkened. "This is highly unusual." Another council member slowly stepped forward. "The royal guardian has chosen to remain beside an outsider." He turned toward Elara. "What exactly have you done?" The unexpected question left her confused. "I treated an injured animal. Nothing more." The council members exchanged doubtful glances. One quietly whispered, "Ancient law forbids anyone from interfering with the royal bond." Another added, "No ordinary healer should earn the complete trust of the king's companion." Commander Aldrich frowned. "My lords, she saved his life." One counselor folded his arms. "Or influenced it." The clearing became silent. Elara looked at them calmly. "I asked for nothing. I expected nothing. I simply helped someone who needed help." The elderly counselor shook his head. "Intentions alone do not erase ancient laws." Kaelen finally stepped forward. "Enough." His voice remained calm. Yet every guard immediately straightened. "She acted with compassion. Nothing more." Another council member answered respectfully, "Your Majesty, no one doubts her kindness. But the people will ask questions. They already whisper that your bonded guardian now obeys another." That moment, the great hound quietly stood. It walked toward Elara, then calmly sat beside her once again. The council members watched in stunned silence. One whispered, "You see." Another looked toward the king. "This has never happened." The little girl instinctively reached for Elara's hand. "They're wrong. He just likes her." No one answered the child. "Is it?" The oldest council member slowly opened an ancient scroll. Until this matter is understood, we ask that the healer remain within the royal fortress. Elara looked at Kaelen. Am I being invited? Or accused? Kaelen remained silent for a moment. Finally he answered honestly. I don't know yet. The truth hurt more than a comforting lie ever could. Elara lowered her eyes briefly, then nodded. If going helps protect the people staying here, I'll come willingly. The little girl immediately shook her head. No, please don't go. Elara knelt beside her. I'm not leaving you. You'll come with us. The child looked toward Kaelen. Really? The Alpha King smiled gently. You have my word. Commander Aldrich quietly arranged the journey. No chains, no harsh treatment, only respectful escort. Even so, the road toward Blackstone Fortress felt much longer than before. As they traveled, villagers stepped outside their homes. Many recognized Elara. They waved. Some offered flowers. Others quietly thanked her for medicines she had once provided. The council members noticed every gesture. One whispered to another. She has earned remarkable trust. Late that evening, the royal procession finally reached Blackstone Fortress. Its towering stone walls rose high above the mountains. Warm lights glowed from hundreds of windows. For the little girl it looked enormous. For Elara, felt unfamiliar. As they entered through the great gates, servants paused to watch. Whispers spread quickly. That's the healer. She's the one who saved the royal guardian. The Hound refuses to leave her. The rumors traveled through the fortress almost as quickly as the evening breeze. That night, Elara was given a quiet guest chamber overlooking the royal gardens. No locked door, no prison bars. Yet she understood something important. Until the council reached its decision, her future remained uncertain. Outside her room, the great black hound calmly lay across the doorway. Every servant who passed smiled at the loyal animal. Several guards politely tried encouraging it to return to the royal kennels. The hound never moved. Commander Aldrich chuckled softly. I've known him for years. When he makes a choice, no one changes his mind. From the opposite hallway, Kaelen quietly watched the scene. His oldest companion had spoken without words. Its loyalty to the crown remained, but its trust in Elara had become equally unshakable. The Alpha King looked toward the night sky beyond the castle windows. Somewhere deep inside, he sensed that this mystery was far from over. And within the ancient walls of Blackstone Fortress, questions older than the kingdom itself were beginning to awaken. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of Blackstone Fortress, filling its ancient halls with warm golden light. Dust drifted lazily through the air, and for a brief moment, the castle felt peaceful. But beneath that quiet calm, questions continued to grow. The story of the healer and the royal hound had spread through every corridor. Some servants believed it was a blessing. Others believed it was an impossible mystery. And the council demanded answers. Elara spent her first morning inside the fortress exactly as she had spent every morning in the forest. She wasn't interested in luxury. Instead, she asked one of the servants, "Is there a place where I can prepare medicine?" The elderly servant smiled kindly. "The royal greenhouse is just beyond the east courtyard. You're welcome there." "Thank you." She gathered her basket and quietly made her way through the castle gardens. The little girl happily walked beside her, stopping every few moments to admire flowers she had never seen before. The great black hound followed behind them at its usual slow pace. Wherever Elara walked, wherever she stopped, it waited. The castle staff watched with amazement. One young maid whispered, "I've served here 5 years. I've never seen him follow anyone except His Majesty." Another nodded. "Neither have I." Across the courtyard, King Kaelen stood beside Commander Aldrich. He watched the quiet scene without speaking. Commander Aldrich folded his arms. You've noticed it too. Kaelen nodded. He doesn't simply trust her. He chooses to remain beside her. The commander looked thoughtful. Perhaps there's something about the old stories. Kaelen turned toward him. What stories? The ones most people stopped believing. Before Aldrich could explain further, an elderly scholar hurried across the courtyard carrying several worn books. My king, I believe we've found something. Deep beneath the fortress lay the royal archive. Few people ever entered its ancient halls. Thousands of books rested upon towering shelves. Some had not been opened for generations. The room smelled of old parchment, cedar wood, and candle wax. Several historians carefully spread ancient scrolls across a large oak table. Their oldest librarian adjusted his glasses. These records were hidden behind sealed shelves. They haven't been studied for nearly 300 years. Kaelen stepped closer. What do they say? The old scholar carefully opened the first journal. It speaks of the first Alpha Kings. Another historian unfolded a faded map covered in handwritten notes. There are references to bonded guardians. Commander Aldrich looked toward the great black hound resting quietly beside the library entrance. Go on. The elderly scholar read slowly. A bonded guardian does not simply protect the Alpha. It also protects the future of the Alpha's heart. Silence filled the room. Another page turned carefully. Long before fate reveals the true mate bond, the guardian may recognize the destined soul. It offers protection before understanding arrives. Kaelen's expression changed. What does that mean? The librarian looked up. It means the guardian sometimes recognizes someone important before the Alpha himself does. The room became completely still. At the opposite side of the library, Elara quietly searched through medical books, completely unaware of the discussion taking place nearby. She wasn't searching for magic. She wanted better remedies for fever and winter illness. The little girl sat beside her drawing flowers onto scraps of paper. The hound rested peacefully at their feet. The child smiled. I think he likes libraries. Elara laughed softly. I think he likes naps. The enormous hound lazily opened one eye before closing it again. Even Kaelen couldn't hide a small smile. The oldest historian continued reading. There is more. He carefully turned another fragile page. A true guardian cannot be persuaded by power. It cannot be controlled by fear. It chooses only according to the oldest law. The law of trust. Commander Aldrich slowly nodded. That explains everything. One council member immediately disagreed. No. It explains nothing. He looked toward Elara. Surely there must be another reason. Kaelen calmly answered. Perhaps compassion is reason enough. The council member remained unconvinced. But why her? Kaelen didn't answer immediately. Because he had begun asking himself the very same question. Later that afternoon, Elara wandered into one of the castle's oldest gardens. Tall white roses climbed across ancient stone walls. Butterflies floated lazily between colorful flowers. The little girl ran ahead laughing. The hound quietly followed. Kaelen eventually joined them. Neither spoke at first. They simply walked together along the narrow garden path. Finally Elara broke the silence. Your castle is beautiful. Kaelen smiled faintly. It feels less empty lately. She looked toward him. Because your companion came home. He thought carefully before answering. Partly. She nodded. I'm glad. Another quiet silence settled between them. Comfortable. And hurried. The kind that didn't require words. Eventually Elara asked. Do you believe everything written in those old books? Kaelen looked toward the distant mountains. I believe history remembers more than we sometimes understand. She smiled thoughtfully. I've always believed choices matter more than destiny. Kaelen glanced at her. What makes you say that? She gently picked a white flower growing beside the path. If kindness only exists because fate planned it, then kindness loses its meaning. I would rather believe people choose who they become. Kaelen remained silent. Her words stayed with him. For years he had carried the weight of ancient traditions. Yet hearing her speak made those traditions feel smaller, less certain. As sunset painted the sky with soft shades of orange and pink, the little girl sat beside the fountain feeding crumbs to small birds. The great black hound rested peacefully beside her. Commander Aldrich quietly approached Kaelen. Well, Kaelen smiled without taking his eyes off Elara. I still don't understand why he trusts her. The commander chuckled. I don't think that's the mystery anymore. Kaelen looked at him. What do you mean? Aldrich smiled knowingly. I think the real mystery is why you're beginning to trust her too. Kaelen said nothing. 'Cause for the first time, he realized the old commander might be right. Far above them, evening stars slowly appeared over Blackstone Fortress. Inside the ancient library, the forgotten pages remained open upon the table. Their faded words had awakened questions that could no longer be ignored. And somewhere deep within the silent bond connecting the Alpha King, his loyal guardian, and the compassionate healer, destiny continued to move quietly, one gentle heartbeat at a time. The days that followed passed more quietly than anyone expected. Blackstone Fortress had always been a place filled with meetings, training grounds, and royal duties. Yet somehow, since Elara arrived, a different kind of calm had settled within its walls. It wasn't loud enough for everyone to notice, but those who paid attention could feel it. The servants smiled a little more. The gardens seemed fuller of laughter. Even the great black hound walked through the halls with an ease that had not been seen in years. Early one morning, the first rays of sunlight slipped through the greenhouse windows. Rows of herbs filled the room with the gentle scent of mint, lavender, and rosemary. Elara carefully arranged small jars along a wooden shelf while humming a quiet tune she barely realized she remembered. Nearby, the little girl sorted freshly picked flowers into neat bundles. She looked up with a bright smile. I've never seen so many plants. Elara laughed softly. I haven't either. But I think they like being cared for. The child nodded seriously. Just like people. Elara gently brushed a loose strand of hair behind the girl's ear. Exactly. Outside the greenhouse door, Kaelen paused. He had come to ask about the hound's recovery. Is it? He found himself quietly watching the peaceful scene inside. The little girl laughed as she accidentally dropped a basket of herbs. Elara simply laughed with her instead of becoming upset. The great hound lazily stretched before carrying the empty basket back with surprising care. The child clapped happily. See? He's helping. Kaelen smiled to himself. For years, the hound had been known throughout the kingdom as a fearless guardian. It patiently carried baskets, followed children through gardens, and slept beside a healer reading books. Life had become wonderfully ordinary. Commander Aldrich approached quietly. You've been standing there for several minutes. Kaelen folded his arms. I know. You could always go inside. Kaelen looked away. I don't wish to interrupt. The commander chuckled. I don't think anyone would mind. A few moments later, Kaelen stepped into the greenhouse. Elara looked up and smiled warmly. Good morning. Good morning. He glanced toward the neatly arranged shelves. You've transformed this place. She looked around. It already had everything. It only needed someone to use it. Kaelen nodded thoughtfully. You have a way of seeing possibilities where others see empty rooms. Elara smiled. I could say the same about kingdoms. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Neither hurried to speak. Some silences felt uncomfortable. This one didn't. The little girl suddenly appeared between them carrying 2 small watering cans. I need helpers. Kaelen raised an eyebrow. Helpers? She nodded confidently. One person can't water every flower. Elara laughed. I suppose she's right. For the next hour, The Alpha King of Blackstone quietly watered herbs beside a village healer, while a little girl gave both of them very serious instructions. No, not that flower. It already has enough. These ones are thirsty. Even Kaelen couldn't hide his laughter. Commander Aldrich watched through the window and quietly shook his head. I never imagined I'd see the day. That afternoon, the fortress library became unusually busy. Elara carried several medical books to a large wooden table near the windows. Kaelen arrived shortly afterward carrying historical records requested by the royal scholars. Neither had planned to meet there. Yet neither seemed surprised. Elara smiled. Research again. Kaelen nodded. The council still wants answers. And you? I'm searching for better remedies for winter fever. He placed his books beside hers. May I help? She looked pleasantly surprised. You know anything about herbs? He smiled faintly. Not enough. But I can organize books. She laughed softly. That will do. Hours passed peacefully. The room remained almost silent except for the turning of pages and the soft crackling of the fireplace. Occasionally they exchanged short conversations. I've already read this one. So have I. This chapter repeats itself. It does. Simple words. Nothing dramatic. Yet each conversation felt easier than the last. The little girl eventually wandered in carrying paper and charcoal. She quietly sat beside the fireplace drawing pictures. One drawing showed the chapel. Another showed the giant hound. Then she carefully began drawing 3 people standing together beneath a large oak tree. Elara noticed. Who's that? The child smiled. You. She pointed toward the tallest figure. The traveler. Then she laughed. I mean, the king. Kaelen looked at the picture. And who's this? The little girl pointed toward herself. I'm making soup. All 3 laughed. The sound echoed warmly through the enormous library. Several elderly scholars smiled without looking up from their books. As evening approached, the castle gardens glowed beneath the setting sun. Golden light reflected across the fountain while hundreds of birds returned to their nests. Elara sat quietly beside the water. The hound rested nearby with its head comfortably across its front paws. Kaelen joined her carrying 2 cups of warm herbal tea. I wasn't sure which one you preferred. She accepted one gratefully. Thank you. Farewell. Neither spoke. The peaceful silence felt complete all by itself. Finally Kaelen broke it. There was someone. Elara looked toward him. He watched the fountain quietly. Years ago, I believed she was meant to become my mate. His voice remained calm. But fate had other plans. Elara didn't interrupt. She simply listened. I buried myself in responsibility. The kingdom always needed something. So I convinced myself I no longer needed anyone. He smiled sadly. It seemed easier. Elara lowered her eyes toward her cup. I understand. Kaelen looked at her. You do. She nodded slowly. When I was younger, I lost the only family I had. For a long time, I believed caring too deeply only made goodbye harder. The evening breeze gently moved through the gardens. Neither tried to comfort the other. Neither searched for perfect words. They simply remained there, sharing silence instead of loneliness. Nearby, the little girl chased glowing fireflies across the grass. The great hound calmly followed behind her, making sure she never wandered too far. Commander Aldrich watched from a nearby balcony. One young guard smiled. They look like a family. Aldrich looked toward the peaceful garden. Perhaps. Or perhaps. They're simply reminding each other what home feels like. As darkness settled over Blackstone Fortress, thousands of stars filled the sky. Killer, the Alpha King, the little girl, and the faithful guardian remained together beneath the quiet night. No ancient prophecy had spoken. No magical light filled the heavens. Only something much simpler. Trust. Trust was where every great love story truly began. The morning of the gathering arrived beneath a sky of soft gray clouds. A cool breeze drifted across Blackstone Fortress, carrying with it the quiet feeling that something important was about to change. From every corner of the kingdom, pack leaders, village elders, scholars, and council representatives entered the great courtyard. The ancient hall had witnessed countless royal decisions through the years. Today, its stone walls would witness another. But this time the decision wasn't about land. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't even about power. It was about compassion. Inside her chamber, Elara stood quietly beside the window. She looked out over the castle gardens where the little girl played with the great black hound among the flowers. The child laughed as the enormous guardian gently nudged a wooden ball back toward her. The simple scene made Elara smile. A gentle knock came at the door. "Come in." Commander Aldrich entered. "The council is ready." Elara nodded. "I suppose this moment had to come." The commander offered a reassuring smile. "No matter what happens today, you've already changed this kingdom." She looked at him with quiet gratitude. "I only tried to help." "And sometimes," Aldrich replied softly, "that's exactly what changes everything." Across the fortress, King Kaelen stood alone in the royal chamber. His ceremonial cloak rested across his shoulders, but his thoughts were far from royal tradition. He looked at the ancient Alpha crest carved into the stone wall. For years, he had followed every law, protected every border, carried every responsibility expected of him. But today, one question echoed louder than all the others. What is a kingdom without kindness? A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. "Your Majesty." A young guard entered. "The gathering has begun." Kaelen nodded once. "I'll be there shortly." The great hall slowly filled with quiet conversation. Rows of wooden benches surrounded the circular stone floor. Above them hung banners representing every allied pack within the territory. One by one, the leaders took their seats. When King Kaelen entered, every voice faded into respectful silence. He acknowledged them with a slight nod before taking his place. Moments later, the large doors opened again. Elara entered calmly. She wore the same simple blue dress she had worn while treating villagers in the forest. She had accepted no royal jewels, no expensive clothing. She wished to stand before everyone exactly as she truly was. Beside her walked the little girl, and behind them, the great black hound. The entire hall watched in complete silence. Many had expected the royal guardian to remain beside the Alpha King. It quietly chose to walk beside Elara. Soft whispers spread through the crowd. "I've never seen anything like it." "Neither have I." "How is this possible?" The oldest council member slowly rose. "Today, we gather not to judge kindness, but to understand what it means." He looked toward Elara. "You entered this kingdom as a stranger. You saved the royal guardian. You earned the trust of people across our lands." He paused. "But questions remain." He turned toward the scholars. "Have the ancient records been confirmed?" The elderly librarian stood. "They have." He carefully opened one of the restored journals. "Our research found no evidence of wrongdoing. Instead, it confirms that a bonded guardian follows trust before tradition." A quiet murmur spread through the hall. Several leaders exchanged thoughtful glances. One village elder smiled. "I suspected as much." Another council member nodded slowly. "It appears we judged too quickly." Even so, one senior advisor stood. "My king, our laws were written to protect the kingdom. If we simply ignore tradition, what example do we set?" Kaelen remained silent for a moment. Then he slowly stood. His voice was calm, steady, never raised. "Our laws exist to protect people. They were never meant to discourage compassion." The advisor lowered his eyes respectfully. "But traditions give us stability." Kaelen nodded. "They do. But traditions should also leave room for wisdom." He looked across the gathering. If someone risks their own comfort to help another, should that ever become a reason for suspicion? No one answered, because everyone already knew the truth. Then, the little girl quietly stepped forward. She looked around the enormous hall with understandable nervousness. Elara gently squeezed her shoulder. You don't have to speak. The child looked up. I want to. Kaelen smiled kindly. You may. The hall became perfectly still. The little girl took one slow breath. When I was alone, everyone walked past. She looked toward Elara. She didn't. Her eyes filled with quiet emotion. She helped me. Before she knew my name. Silence filled every corner of the hall. Even the council members lowered their eyes. The child smiled through gentle tears. And he. She pointed toward the great black hound. Stayed beside me until she came. The guardian calmly walked forward. Instead of standing beside the throne, it quietly sat beside the child. The moment spoke louder than words ever could. Commander Aldrich stepped forward. I have served 3 Alpha Kings. I have witnessed countless victories. But today, he smiled warmly. I believe this kingdom has witnessed something greater. Several pack leaders nodded in agreement. One elderly alpha rose from his seat. Our territories have followed fear for too long. Perhaps it's time they also follow hope. Others quietly voiced their support. One after another. Heads nodded throughout the hall. The atmosphere slowly changed. Not because someone had won an argument. Because hearts had begun to understand. Kaelen walked to the center of the gathering. An ancient scroll rested upon a stone table before him. It contained outdated laws that had allowed unfair treatment of vulnerable travelers within the border territories. He looked toward every leader present. Our future should never be built upon another person's fear. He gently rolled the old scroll closed. We begin again. The hall erupted into respectful applause. Not loud. Not overwhelming. Simply sincere. The fortress bells rang softly across the valley. Their sound carried through villages, forests, and distant hills. It felt less like the end of a trial, and more like the beginning of a kinder chapter. As everyone slowly left the great hall, Elara stepped onto the palace balcony overlooking the gardens. The evening sun painted the sky with shades of gold and rose. The little girl ran happily across the grass with the great black hound beside her. Kaelen quietly joined Elara. They accepted your choice. She smiled gently. No. She looked toward the people below. I think they accepted their own. Kaelen followed her gaze. Families laughed together. Children played freely. Servants smiled as they walked through the gardens. The kingdom looked different somehow. Not because its walls had changed. 'Cause its people had. Kaelen looked at Elara. You reminded us that strength isn't measured by how much power we hold. She looked back at him. Sometimes. It's measured by how gently we use it. Their eyes met beneath the golden evening sky. Neither spoke again. They didn't need to. The silence between them had become something rare. Something peaceful. Something that quietly promised. The most important chapter of their story was still waiting to be written.